This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim, live from Jerusalem. Tonight, a Prime Minister on the defence after a week of pressure. More protests tonight as Benjamin Netanyahu is accused of condemning hostages to death. He insists his troops will remain on the border with Egypt, a key sticking point in ceasefire talks. That's as the man often described as Mr. Netanyahu's brain tells me the British government should be ashamed of its partial ban on arms exports.
Ask yourself how the British people would feel if when Churchill was leading Britain in its fight against the Nazis and Britain was standing largely alone, if all of a sudden there'd be arms embargoes from its great friend and ally.
The families of hostages, senior generals and some politicians say government policy is risking lives. We'll have live reaction. Plus,
the painful thing is that, women, babies could not save themselves.
he narrowly escaped death when his boat capsized. We hear from one man who even now says he has no choice but to try to cross the channel again. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening and welcome to this special edition of The World with me, Yalda Hakim, live here in Jerusalem. And what a week it has been. It started on Sunday night where we saw mass demonstrations across this country, tens of thousands of people. There were some estimates saying that there was 500,000 people that were gathered to demonstrate the actions of the Israeli government. They were pointing the finger of blame and all of their anger towards Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu following the death of and the killing of 6 Israeli hostages. Their bodies were retrieved from Gaza at the weekend. That anger turned into strikes that we saw as well in the country. We also saw a very rare appearance from Benjamin Netanyahu. Over the course of the last 9 or 10 months since October 7, Benjamin Netanyahu has rarely given press conferences or spoken directly to his nation, even in periods of intense grief. But on Monday, he came out and he spoke directly to the nation and the Israeli press in Hebrew. Today, he spent another hour or so talking directly to the media. So the big question then is this a government on the back foot, trying to project its message to the world? It comes after strong criticism from Joe Biden, from the families of hostages and from senior generals. Benjamin Netanyahu, as I said, gave foreign journalists a full PowerPoint presentation in his defense of his strategy in Gaza. He's been accused of prioritizing his desire to keep Israeli troops on the border between Gaza and Egypt above a ceasefire deal. But he denied his policies had condemned hostages to death. The people to blame, he said, were Hamas, not him. Have a listen.
I'm committed as the Prime Minister of Israel to 2 things. They're right here. The first one is to achieve the release of the hostages, and the second is to protect the security of Israel and make sure that we have no more hostage taking, no more murders, no more rapes, and no more rocketing of Israel. Both of them. We have to have this and this together. After Rafah, their tune changed. And they began to change. If we leave Rafah, if we leave the Philadelphia corridor, there won't be any pressure. We won't get the hostages. I said I'm willing to make a deal. The real obstacle to making a deal is not Israel. And it's not me. It's Hamas.
That was Benjamin Netanyahu speaking a few hours ago. Well, let's bring in our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, who's here with me now. And Ali, a few days ago, you were in Tel Aviv. You've been following the story, obviously, for the entirety of this year. But let's talk about the Philadelphia corridor, because, of course, we've seen at various points when there have been ceasefire negotiations and talks, there have been different sticking points. It seems now this sliver of land has become the latest sticking point.
It is, and if you take what the mediators say, they think that they can bring the 2 sides together over the finer points, but it's the Philadelphia corridor that remains the big gap between Israel and Hamas. Now, the Philadelphia corridor is a strip of land in southern Gaza, which effectively is the border between Gaza and Egypt. It's 9 miles wide we put it on a map here, 9 miles, 15 kilometers from the eastern edge of Gaza through to the Mediterranean Sea, currently occupied by the Israeli military. Now, prior to October the 7th, and for many years, Hamas used tunnels underneath that border into the Egyptian Sinai very profitably to smuggle lots of things into Gaza, but specifically in this case, weapons, and that helped them arm themselves, and we saw that and the effects of that on October the 7th. Now that Israeli forces are in, and you can see from these pictures, are in the Philadelphia corridor, Benjamin Netanyahu is refusing to withdraw them completely. And he's making multiple arguments for it. He's saying if they did, then Hamas could use the tunnels again to smuggle weapons in and rearm. They could smuggle hostages out into Egypt and perhaps take them to Iran and Yemen. That is his claim. He points to the fact that the Israelis occupied the Philadelphia corridor before. Many years ago, Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip, and he says, look what happened. Hamas armed themselves. And he makes the point that if Israeli forces withdrew as a part of a ceasefire deal now, whatever the world says, the pressure would be on Israel never to go back. And so he is insistent that forces remain there. He's not saying how many forces. He had a phrase the other night, said it's not about a massive number of forces, it's about a sufficient number of forces, whatever that might mean. Maybe that is wriggle room for the mediators. But Hamas are insisting if they're going to do a deal, Israeli forces have to go. And so the two sides are well entrenched in their positions, and they're refusing to budge.
Ali, we saw Benjamin Netanyahu, as I said earlier, come out and give a press conference on Monday. He spoke again today. We rarely see him speak so many times to the media as well in the same week. Do you think there's a concern that the messaging that they're putting out is not landing?
Definitely. I think that probably is one of the main reasons why we've seen these two press conferences in 48 hours, in effectively 2 days. He's given quite a lot of interviews over the last 11 months, particularly to American outlets, I think presumably because he wants to get his message across in America, which is so influential, or could be so influential in this war. He's given, I think, a single interview to a friendly television channel in Hebrew. Other than that, no Hebrew language interviews. And so I do think that he is under, well, he's certainly under a lot of domestic pressure, even though he bats it away. He's under a lot of international pressure, and I think these press conferences were to try and address that, to try and explain his position. Now, they were uncompromising, they were defiant, they gave very little hope for people, particularly the families of the hostages who want a ceasefire deal, but I think it is part of Israel's messaging. It was a pretty wide-ranging press conference, but it did focus on the Philadelphia corridor, and what we're going to play you next is a bit of an exchange from a question that I asked him.
They target us. You know what they teach in the schools, in the PA schools? They teach exactly the same thing that they teach, the same textbooks, as in the same textbooks here in the PA schools as here. Same thing. Israel has to be destroyed, kill as many Jews, pay for slay. The more Jews, the more Israelis you killed, the more you get paid. There's a difference in strategy. You know, Hamas believes that the way to destroy Israel is through outright terror and military confrontation immediately, backed by Iran. It's all part of the Iranian axis. The Palestinian Authority believes that the way to do it is by ICC, by having lawfare, absurd charges leveled at Israel and its leaders, including me. Enormous pressure to drive Israel to indefensible boundaries, where the boundaries would be right here, right next to Tel Aviv, that's it. 8, 10 miles from the sea, and then push to the sea. There's a difference, but the goals are the same. No, I didn't show that, but if you want, Alistair, next press conference, I guarantee you can ask all the questions you want, and I'll give you the answers, the truth, the facts that your readers and viewers do not get. In this horrible harangue of this one democracy fighting this just war with just means against the most horrendous savages on the planet.
Ali, thanks so much. And of course, we will be getting more analysis from you a little later in the program. So we're talking there about Benjamin Netanyahu's policies and his defense. But we also spoke today to a man who's often described as Benjamin Netanyahu, or Bibi as he's known, his brain, Minister of Strategic Affairs, Ron Dermer, to make sure his message landed. I spoke to him earlier and asked him about the anger being directed at the government here. Have a listen.
First of all, everybody is grieving, as you said, because of the execution. They weren't just found, they were executed by Hamas, 6 hostages, 6 Israelis, one of them was an American as well. And it was a gut punch for the whole country. And I think everybody in Israel is not only mourning their loss, but is frankly angry. And there are people in Israel who are angry at their government. But I think the vast majority of people of Israel are angry at Hamas. And I think the international community should direct its anger at Hamas. And hopefully, if there's enough anger and Hamas understands that they have crossed the line, that will enable us to move forward to achieve a hostage deal. Because the last thing we want to do, Yalda, is in the wake of an execution of hostages, is to make concessions that Israel would otherwise not make, because that is just going to, that's first of all not going to get us to a hostage deal, because they're going to keep moving the goalposts. But beyond that, it's going to endanger more hostages. So it is understandable, first, not only the grief, which is felt everybody in Israel, but I understand the anger. I think if we direct that anger at Hamas, we have a much better chance to get to a deal that can bring some of these hostages home.
And you know, Mr. Dermer, I'm not disagreeing with you on the actions of Hamas and the execution of these innocent civilians who were taken into Gaza and killed in that way. But I just want to focus on the actions of your government, because the Hostages Families Forum, following the Prime Minister's speech on Monday, where he pleaded for forgiveness from the people of Israel for not being able to bring those hostages back home alive, they described his speech as full of lies. They said it was spin. And I'm just going to quote them, because they've said that they've accused your government of criminal negligence.
Well, listen, I'm not going to get into a debate, Yalda, with the hostage families, with any of them. There are many different types of families with many different views. I think none of us can put ourselves into their shoes and understand a minute of the torment that they're going through day after day. I myself have met 50 or 60 times with hostage families who, as I said, have very different views. What I can tell you, Yalda, is that the government of Israel is committed to getting a hostage deal to bring them home. Unfortunately, we don't have a partner on the other side that has been prepared to do any deal. When the President of the United States put forward a proposal and backed a proposal at the end of May, Israel said yes and Hamas said no. And then only 3 weeks ago, on August 16th, there was a bridging proposal that was put forward by the United States. The Secretary of State Blinken was here in Israel. He met with the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister said he supports that bridging proposal. Hamas wasn't interested in that. What Hamas was interested in at that time is they were interested in a regional escalation, in a war with Hezbollah in Israel, with Iran to strike Israel. That's what they're interested in. What they're interested in right now, frankly, is that there should be, mass unrest in Israel, because for them, that's good news. What we need to do is be united not only within Israel, but also with the international community and all of those who support really civilization against barbarism. Turn our anger towards Hamas, let them know the game is up, that they have to move towards a deal.
Mr. Dermer, why is the US president then saying to reporters in the United States that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is not doing enough to secure a ceasefire deal? You talked about Hamas not having a partner on the other side, but the president of the United States, your staunchest of allies, someone who came here and gave Israel a bear hug right from the very beginning, has supported Israel for decades, is now saying that your Prime Minister is not doing enough to bring those hostages home. I mean, in fact, your own defense minister has said that, frankly, the discussions around the Philadelphia corridor is a disgrace. The idea of total victory is nonsense.
I disagree with that judgment, and so does the government of Israel, and so do, I believe, the overwhelming majority of the people of Israel. I was in that cabinet meeting last week on Thursday, and there was a vote. And, all of the relevant authorities in Israel, our IDF, our security services,
they voted for that.
I voted to maintain the Philadelphia corridor because I know exactly what that is. That is the gateway for Hamas to rearm itself.
And the hostage families have said...
Right. If you just let me, if I can finish this point. I don't think most of your viewers would know Philadelphia from Philadelphia. Philadelphia is a corridor that separates Gaza. It's the border between Gaza and Egypt. For the last 20 years, that border, essentially underground and above ground, has been open to a flood of all the weapons that came in. The attack on October 7th could not have happened if that border was closed. Now, I'm not casting aspersions on Egypt, but the bottom line is that for the last 2 decades, that has been used as a supply chain for Hamas armaments. Right now, Israel is there, and we should not leave that border unless there's a solution in place that is a long-term practical solution on the ground. And there was a discussion in the Israeli cabinet. There was several, and there was a vote. And so the prime minister is supported by the security cabinet of Israel. And I will tell you, as you're walking, I see that you're in Israel, but go around the country and ask people, and you'll see that the overwhelming majority of people support Israel retaining that corridor because they know that if we leave there, that we're just going to repeat October 7th again and again and again. And there's no solution yet that's in place. We're willing to go into a hostage deal, to negotiate a long-term solution for this. But right now, Israel has to maintain that line.
Mr. Dermer, I've been speaking to former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert. I've been speaking to the defense establishment. I've been speaking to the security establishment. And they, with respect, disagree. People who have been military generals in this country for over 30 years, people who have run this country, who have been in charge of that corridor, say that for the Israeli people, for the state of Israel, that is inconsequential. What is important is to ensure that those hostages are brought back alive and that they're rescued from Gaza. And the only way to do that is to reach a ceasefire agreement like the one that you reached in November, which allowed you to bring 105 hostages home and allow for a temporary ceasefire in Gaza, which brought respite to the Palestinian people as well.
That's right. And we support doing a temporary ceasefire, negotiating a permanent ceasefire during that temporary ceasefire. That's exactly what the framework is that's on the table. I don't believe, and it's wrong to suggest that this is the only holdup in the negotiations. There are several points in the negotiations that we have not finalized. There's a big focus right now on the Philadelphia corridor. I can tell you we worked with the Americans and the other mediators to make clear what our position was during any phase one part of the deal. When you start negotiations over a permanent ceasefire and what that looks like long term, it's a different question. As for a lot of different officials, understand something. We left Lebanon in 2000. Israel unilaterally withdrew from Lebanon, and some of the people you quoted there were responsible for that decision. They promised the people of Israel it would make them safer. Right now, on our northern border, it's ghost towns in Israel. Why? Because we don't have any way up until this point to stop Hezbollah from arming itself with all these weapons that they're using to fire at Israel, and it turned 60,000, 70,000, 80,000 Israelis into refugees in their own country. Wait, let me just finish this point. It's an important point. You said an important thing. You gave a long indictment of people who have a different view. Now I'm going to explain to you where the people of Israel. After the withdrawal from Lebanon, it didn't make us safer, it made us less safe. You also had many people who left that Philadelphia corridor in 2005. They promised the Israeli people this Gaza disengagement, this withdrawal from Gaza, the unilateral withdrawal will make us safer. The Israeli people don't believe it. And what happened on October 7th is part of the story of Israel withdrawing from that corridor.
But is that not just a security failure of the government of Israel? October 7, also the government of Israel needs to take responsibility because it was a security failure on the part of the Israeli government. But I'm so sorry, I'm being told I've got a short amount of time. I just want to ask you a question about the UK suspending some arms to Israel. I just want to get your response to that because a number of officials in Israel have called it disappointing.
Well, I guess they're more diplomatic than I would call it a shameful decision to be made at a time when Israel is fighting a war to have export licenses that are suspended. I think that Israel is on the front lines fighting against Iran and its access that are the enemies of civilization. I see Britain as being a center of civilization. You'd ask yourself how the British people would feel if when Churchill was leading Britain in its fight against the Nazis and Britain was standing largely alone, if all of a sudden there'd be arms embargoes from its great friend and ally. So I think it's a mistake. And I think it's a mistake not only because of the timing, that it comes 2 days or 3 days after the execution of hostages. I think it's a mistake because Israel's not violating international humanitarian law. It's just not true. I think we discussed this last time on your show. And so I think the way the British law works, if I understand, just to finish the sentence, if I understand how British law works, it's if they think there's a risk a risk of international humanitarian law being violated in the future, and therefore you stop these arms. I don't know what that means. That means that Britain can't arm itself. Because anytime Britain, a democracy is in war with terrorism, you could have a risk of a situation. Israel comports with international law fully, and that's why I think this decision, it would be bad at any time, but it is horrendous at this time.
Well, of course, the United Kingdom stood with Israel when Iran launched a series of missiles, 300 missiles on Israel in April. They were part of a wider coalition and they stood with Israel, but they clearly have major concerns now in the middle of this war to do this, and not just the United Kingdom. We've seen the same move, weapons being halted by the likes of Spain, by Italy, by Belgium, by the Netherlands, by Canada. The United States temporarily halted a shipment. I mean, these are people who have stood by Israel and stand by Israel publicly and behind closed doors. The fact that today, in the middle of this conflict, they feel they have to do this, that begs the question, what exactly is going on in Gaza for them to feel they need to make this move?
It's not an indictment of Israel, Yalda. It's an indictment of all those countries that you mentioned. You mentioned one country that I heard was Spain. Spain decided to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state after the worst attack against Jews since the Holocaust. And many other countries right now are folding in the face of internal political pressures because of, frankly, the distorted view that they get from their media day after day. And instead of all the anger of the world being directed at Hamas for using their own people as human shields, for using hospitals and schools and mosques and endangering Palestinians, they're still doing it today. Instead of all of that being directed at Hamas, a lot of people lack the moral clarity, and you end up directing that at Israel. You should not fold in the face of the pressure. What should be done now
including the
is
hostage
the free
families?
world, all the countries that you saw, the free world should stand with Israel. Again, I'm not going to judge a single hostage family. These hostage families want to know, and I'm sure if any of us were in this awful situation, we're doing everything to bring our people home. And it's very hard to put pressure on Hamas, because the world doesn't stand with us. You just gave a litany of countries that have decided to do this or that arms embargo. That tells you that Hamas thinks that its strategy of using its own people as human shields is working. And that's why they'll continue to do it. And they think they're going to pressure Israel and that Israel will fold. I'm telling you, as a member of the Security Cabinet of Israel, we will stand firm. We will not fold. We are going to do everything we can to bring those hostages home. But in that process, we are not going to endanger the security of 10 million Israelis and enable October 7th to happen again and again and again, just like Hamas wants.
Well, this is what you've been saying for 10 or 11 months, and this language and the policy is not working. In fact, Hamas has now said that its policy, if Israeli military attempts to extract those hostages through the military means, that they are going to, their policy is to execute the hostages. Clearly, the policy that you have to use military force to get the hostages out is not working. So are you willing to accept more body bags into Israel?
I'm going to have to respectfully disagree with you. The policy of military force got that first hostage deal that you talked about in November, when we got 110 hostages out. We also had several rescue operations where we were able to take 7 or 8 Israelis and to bring them home. In addition to that, the only sign that we've seen of Hamas being willing to compromise on anything came in the wake of a very tough military operation when we went into Rafah and we seized the Rafah crossing and the Philadelphia quarter. Something, by the way, which most of the countries in the world said would mean thousands and tens of thousands, perhaps, of innocent Palestinians being killed. It was all false. 1 million people got out of harm's way. You know why? Because Israel's not trying to harm them. And when we use that military pressure, it enables us
we also have a polio situation.
Getting to a hostage deal. Hamas has standing orders that if Israel's going to rescue these hostages, that they should be executed. This is the type of organization that we're dealing with, and we take it into account when we plan and think about all these types of operations, and we're going to do everything we can to get these people home. But what the world should do right now is turn its outrage to Hamas. I was pleased to see that the American Justice Department yesterday brought charges against Hamas. I think in Congress I heard today that they're going to move ahead with action against the Iranians and the Qataris who are harboring Hamas and supporting them. That is the action that has to be taken. When Hamas believes that Israel's military pressure will continue, that the international community, the pressure from the international community is on them, and frankly, that the U.S. and Israel are standing firmly together. That's our chance and our pathway to get to a deal.
That was Ron Dermer speaking to me a little earlier. Well, joining me now is Gil Dickman, whose cousin Carmel Gat was killed in Gaza after being taken hostage. Thank you so much, Gil, for joining us here on the program. I will be speaking to you about Carmel in a moment, but I just want to get your reaction to that interview that you were listening to with Ron Dermer.
Ron Dermer is a loser, and so is all the government of Israel. They lost Carmel's life. They knew that her life was in danger. They knew, and we warned, and we said, we tried to warn them in any way possible that the lives of the hostages are in danger, that there are guns pointed at them at all times, and that they could be murdered at any moment. And they decided, Ron Dermer himself and Prime Minister Netanyahu himself decided that they're going to say no to a deal that will save her life. They decided to sacrifice the lives of Israeli civilians, Israeli people who were taken from their bed on October 7th under their open eye, the open eye of Ron Dermer and Benjamin Netanyahu. They decided to sacrifice Carmel with all the other hostages, and now they were executed. And he's trying to blame Hamas on that. Hamas is a terror organization. I have no expectation from Hamas. I have very, very large expectations from my own government, who decided that they just want to sacrifice innocent civilians. This is what we're facing right now. And just like you said, the strategy, the horrible strategy of this government is not working. It brings us only hostages in coffins, just like my cousin. And the way I see it, the way I understand it, if we're going to continue, we're going to go on with this strategy. We're going to see more and more hostages being killed. Ron Dermer knows it. And knowingly, he decides to keep on doing the same thing. He knows that his actions are going to get hostages killed and murdered. He is in charge of the next murder of hostages.
Gil, I mean, I'm so sorry for your loss, and I can hear your pain and the pain of so many families who have lost their children, their mothers, their fathers in this hostage situation. Talk to me about Carmel, because we're hearing some details about her, that she was doing some meditation with the hostages during her time there. That's how she spent much of her time, and that perhaps she was hopeful that she would come out alive.
Yes, unlike the Israeli government, Carmel was doing whatever she could to keep the other hostages safe and secure, and to try to keep them healthy, both physically and mentally. She was with 2 teenage hostages, and she was doing yoga sessions and meditation sessions in order to keep them hopeful and to try to think about the time when they will actually have a chance to come home. And when these 2 hostages came out and told us, we were so glad to hear it, because for us, that means that Carmel is still herself, and that she was able to stay strong for the sake of others. And that's so important for us to know. She was supposed to get out on the 8th day of the November ceasefire, but then the ceasefire collapsed. There were so many opportunities and so many deals on the table, to which Hamas even said yes. And there was a list with Carmel's name, along with Hirsch's name and Eden's name and other hostages' names. And Netanyahu decided that he doesn't want a deal right now. He wants to wait for something to happen, maybe. He wants to insist on Philadelphia or on Netzarim. I don't know. The excuses always change. But we missed the chance to get her out. And I personally see it as my own fault that we didn't do enough as a family to show the world that we are being managed. Israel is being led by a bunch of losers, because the IDF is an army of winners. They can actually win a war. But these losers lost Carmel. They lost all these hostages that they could have saved. And for that, we will never forgive them. We don't care about revenge. We don't care whether the IDF kills more terrorists right now. The only thing we care about is that Israel gets back these hostages that are there for almost 11 months. That's way too much. And it's a complete failure of this government. And even if the ministers in the Israeli government are trying to show you like they have a big plan for how to run this war, right now they're losing it and they're sacrificing all the hostages, and they have no right to do that.
Gil, I'm so grateful for your time. Before we let you go, we'd like to show our viewers an image of happier times with you and Carmel as children. I think we can put it up on our screen, as well as an image of Carmel before we let you go. We've got that image up. We're so sorry for your loss and grateful that you've joined us.
Thank you very much. And let's hope that all the other hostages come back alive and live happily, just like Carmel was and I was with her on this wonderful picture. Thank you.
Thank you, Gil. Now, a moment ago, we heard from Benjamin Netanyahu's right-hand man, Ron Dermer, and Gil was talking about him there in that interview. He told me that Israel would have no choice but to remain in the Philadelphia corridor. That's the 9-mile-long strip of land along Gaza's border with Egypt, including the Rafah crossing. Well, I'm joined now by Amos Yadlin, former head of the IDF Military Intelligence Directorate. Thank you very much, Mr. Yadlin, for joining us here on the program. We heard earlier today from Benjamin Netanyahu. He's spoken a few times this week. I also spoke today with Ron Dermer, who is very much part of his inner circle and very much part of the strategy of this government. And you also heard there from one of the cousins of the hostages who has been killed. From your assessment and your experience, I just want to have a better understanding of what you think about how this conflict has been executed and the attempts at this ceasefire over the course of the last 9 or 10 months.
Yeah, first, I was last night with the Gat family. My daughter was a very good friend of Carmel. I visited the family when they sit Shiva mourning on Carmel, who should have been with us if the government of Israel behaved differently. And it is a pity that a deal could have been a month ago, 2 months ago, and these people could be with us. I don't blame the Israeli government. I blame Hamas first for killing them, for executing them. This is a 40-year-old wonderful woman who was a yoga teacher, who treated kids and treated kids in the prison of Hamas, in the tunnels, in an impressive way. She could be with us if the strategy of the Israeli government would be different. And you're absolutely right. We are 11 months into this war. There were 3 goals to the war in Gaza: to bring back the hostages, to destroy Hamas, and to make sure that Gaza will not threaten Israel anymore. We basically dismantle Hamas as a military army. They cannot do 7th of October again and again. They were destroyed. They are now a group of terrorists in small teams. And if Israel have learned the lesson from the 7th of October, and if Israel is now with better intelligence and better protection of the border, and they will never be able to do the 7th of October again. And the deal is not only Philadelphia. The deal is about other territorial. There is another corridor in Netzarim. Israel will make sure that 1 kilometer from the border, nobody will get
Mr. Yadlin, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to interrupt you there. We've just got some breaking news, a developing story, and I just want to keep you there because we would like to continue this conversation if you have time. I just need to take our viewers to the United States now, where we've been reporting that at least 4 people have died after a gunman opened fire at a school in the state of Georgia. Let's just take you to a press conference that's currently being held and have a listen in.
Good afternoon. I am Chris Hosen, Director of the Georgia Bureau Investigation, and we wanted to come back this afternoon and present you with a little more of a timeline of the events that have taken place here today and what we know up to this point with the investigation. At approximately 10:20 a.m. this morning, the Bexar County Sheriff's Office received alerts about reports of an active shooter and radio traffic from school resource officers concerning the same concern, or having the same concern. Within minutes, law enforcement was on scene, as well as 2 school resource officers assigned here to the school who immediately encountered the subject within just minutes of this report going out. Once they encountered the subject immediately surrendered to these officers, and he was taken into custody. Additionally, what I want you to know as of now, there are 4 individuals who are deceased from this incident, 9 that have been taken to local hospitals with various injuries. Of those that are deceased, 2 are students and 2 are teachers here at the school. The priority right now for us within this investigation is to gather all the facts, to make sure that we're accurate with it, because this is a murder investigation. As the sheriff mentioned earlier this morning, the shooter is in custody. His name is Colt, that's C-O-L-T, Gray. He is a 14-year-old student here at the school, G-R-A-Y. He is a 14-year-old student here at the high school. Again, he has been taken into custody. He will be charged with murder, and he will be tried as an adult and handled as an adult. We're coordinating these charges and obviously this investigation with District Attorney Brad Smith, who is the District Attorney for the Piedmont Judicial Circuit here. Since earlier this morning we talked with you since the incident occurred, numerous interviews have been taking place through our investigation with students, faculty, as well as any other witnesses that we could identify. Law enforcement had a very, very swift response to this incident once the incident was determined that there was a concern here. Those resources, whether it was in that response or throughout this investigation to assist, came obviously from the Sheriff's Office here, from other local law enforcement agencies, state law enforcement agencies, and federal law enforcement agencies as well. To include, not to be left out, multiple EMS personnel, multiple fire personnel, and agencies. Those agencies responded here as well today, and I am extremely grateful, as I know the sheriff is, for that quick response and the partnerships of working here together with what all has gone on. Currently, from the investigative perspective, we have crime scene agents and other special agents from the GBI, from close to a dozen of our different work units from across the state that have responded here today to work on this investigation, again, collecting evidence, conducting interviews, and so forth. I do want to pass this along, that if anyone has any information that wants to be passed on concerning this investigation, that they can do that anonymously at our tip line at 1-800-597-TIPS or 1-800-597-8477. They can also report this on by downloading the See Something, Send Something app. That can be done by Android or Apple phones, either one. If they need to report any tips concerning this investigation. Let me close out before I turn this over to the sheriff and let you just remind you that this is still a very active investigation. There is still a lot that is very fluid. There's still a lot of interviews to be conducted that will continue on into the night, as well as crime scene work and collecting and gathering evidence. But what is more important for me to mention here to you is my heartfelt sympathy to the parents, the students that were here today. Regardless of where they were in the school, this has got a great impact on them as well as on this community. My thoughts and prayers, along with everybody standing behind me and every law enforcement agency in this state, and many I will tell you around this country, they are in our thoughts and prayers. And we will continue with that. We ask for your patience as we continue through this, and we'll continue to try to give you as many updates with information as we can to keep you informed. But thank you for being here. I'm now going to turn it over to Bexar County Sheriff Judge Smith. Thank you. H-O-S-E-Y.
Good afternoon. I'm Sheriff Judge Smith of the Bexar County Sheriff's Office. I never imagined that I would be speaking to the media in my career over something that happened today, the pure evil that happened today. I cannot thank the people behind me for the support they give me today, give this office, and give this staff. This hits home for me. I was born and raised here. I went to school in this school system. My kids go to this school system. I'm proud of this school system. My heart hurts for these kids. My heart hurts for our community. But I want to make it very clear that hate will not prevail in this county. I want that to be very clear and known. Love will prevail over what happened today. I assure you of that. It is very early as to what happened. Governor Kemp reached out to me and has provided me every single resource that he has to make sure justice prevails. I don't know why it happened. I may not ever know. We may not ever know. But I ask that you and our community lift up our schools, lift up our public safety, and that, again, we do not let this hateful event prevail as to what happened today. I want to thank the surrounding agencies and counties and cities and state and federal authorities that have come and provided us, because they prevented a lot of more tragic events from happening. Continue to lift up these families, continue to lift up our students and our kids, and know that love will prevail. At this time, I'm going to ask Dr. LaDuff, our school superintendent, to come and speak on behalf of the school.
Listening there to Sheriff Judge Smith, and before him to the director of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. They gave us an update on the situation with the shooter, said the shooting suspect is a 14-year-old student at the high school and that the shooter is currently in custody. It is a murder investigation, and the shooter will be charged with murder and tried as an adult. So a shooting incident there in the state of Georgia, where we understand 4 people have died and 9 others have been left injured. Let's bring in our Martha Kellner now, who joins us live. And Martha, this is just another stark reminder, isn't it, of these sorts of incidents that happen in schools, high schools, primary schools, and other places in the United States.
Yeah, it is, Yalda. Another day, another mass shooting in the United States, this time Appalachia High School in Winder, Georgia. It's a small city around 50 miles from the state capital, Atlanta. So many lives there turned upside down today. 2 students and 2 teachers losing their lives. The suspect in custody, a 14-year-old boy, a student at the school who, as you said, will be charged with murder and tried as an adult. But really horrific accounts coming out of that school. Students terrified, in tears, talking about piling chairs and tables up against the doors as they realised that this wasn't just another shooting drill, that in fact this was a real life event as they heard those shots ringing out across that school. Kamala Harris, Vice President, has been on the election trail today. She was in New Hampshire at a rally, supposed to be talking about the economy, but she began her address to rallygoers by breaking the news to many of them of this mass shooting in Georgia. She called it a senseless tragedy. She said it's just outrageous, in her words, that parents have to send their children to school not knowing if they will return at the end of the day alive. And curbing gun violence is a major theme of her election bid. She, like President Biden, wants a ban on assault weapons. These are these weapons of war which are so often used in these mass shootings. We don't know if that was the case this time. She also calls for universal background checks. The president himself, Joe Biden, releasing a statement as well, saying that students are having to learn to duck and cover instead of learning to read and write. So the political response to this tragedy ongoing as the investigation is still in its infancy. Donald Trump also weighing in, calling the shooter in this case a deranged monster. But the headline there that two students and two teachers have very sadly lost their lives in this shooting at Appalachia High School in Georgia.
Martha, thank you so much for bringing us up to date. Now, as I've been reporting all week on the situation here in Israel, we've seen protests, we've seen a general strike, and we've seen a lot of anger from the families of the hostages after the death and the killing of 6 hostages whose bodies were recovered from Gaza at the weekend. Joining me now is Amos Yadlin, former head of the IDF Military Intelligence Directorate. Mr. Yadlin, thank you very much for joining us again on the programme. We were just talking to you a few minutes ago before our breaking news there. If we just pick up on what you were saying, you said that you knew some of the hostages, in particular talking about Carmel, who lost her life tragically. She was killed. And you say that, unlike her cousin, who also joined us on the programme, you don't, obviously Hamas did this and took these hostages. But don't you believe then, just like her cousin and so many others here in Israel, that it is the responsibility of the Israeli government to agree to a ceasefire deal to bring these hostages back?
Absolutely. I think the hostages after 11 months should be top priority because they are dying. Anything in a future agreement with Hamas is reversible. We can leave Philadelphia, we can go back. We can release murderers from prison, we can arrest them again. But the hostages are dying, executing, tortured, raped, and we need them back home. It's a moral duty of the government of Israel, which is ignoring it. And to say even more, Gaza was our main goal after October 7 atrocities. It is not anymore. Israel now should look into the north when Hezbollah is much more dangerous, when we have 60,000 people leaving their home. The people of Western Negev who live near Gaza can go back now. It is safe, but the north is not safe. Iran is breaking out towards the bomb. We have the Houthis who are blocking the naval ships to Israel and to Europe and through the Suez Canal. There is a lot of problems, and it is about time to bring back the hostages as a cornerstone for de-escalating the war. If you want to go back to the war again, you can do it. It's a terror organization, you can attack it.
So fundamentally,
by the way,
do you feel
Prime Minister Netanyahu was 15 years a prime minister. He never dealt with Philadelphia. 8 months into the war, Philadelphia was not mentioned. Suddenly, it's become like the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. It is an excuse because he is depending on his right-wingers and his political survival is unfortunately, his compass and not his moral duties and strategic duties to navigate Israel in this tough situation. We need to finish the war in Gaza, bring back the hostages, deal with the rest of our problem. And if we need to go back to Gaza, we know how to do it.
Mr. Amos Yadlin, thank you very much for joining us again here on the programme.
Good night.
You're watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Do stay with us because we've got lots more coming up after the break. We'll reflect on the week so far in Israel as Benjamin Netanyahu looks set to have ignored the hundreds of thousands who took to the streets demanding a ceasefire deal. Stay with us.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling. War, unrest, revolutions.
It's not his country, it's ours, and we are going to take it back.
They have succeeded for the first time in their country's history in removing a leader from power. Now, freedom! There was fighting here, but there's clearly now a lull, and they're using it to bring up more ammunition. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world. This is a mass exodus in which Russia is hemorrhaging some of its brightest and its best. According to the local weather channel, there have been more than 2,500 lightning strikes, torrential rain and flash flooding, all on top of this week's lethal tornado. What stays with you most in this job is some of the people you meet. What is your worst fear about what the Russians want to do to the children?
They're just boosting demographics by stealing young people.
Would you like to take the opportunity, Mr. President, on Sky News to invite Barack Obama to come here? Mr. Trump, are you running for president? Can you confirm it?
We're going to take a look, a very serious look.
On that day, we saw your fighters killing women, killing children. Was that a mistake? Did you go too far? You couldn't control your fighters? The full force of the state is being used to crush any protest. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued with its ultimatum to the people of Ashkelon, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in. Another alarm. The mood here is jittery and nervous. We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Hello and welcome back to this special edition of The World with me, Yalda Hakim, and I've been live here in Jerusalem, and what an extraordinary few days it has been here in Israel. Let's just have a look back at the images and voices as the nation grieved for 6 more hostages killed by Hamas.
We will not stop until they're all back home. We will not stop.
At the National Cemetery on Mount Herzl in Jerusalem, Hirsch Goldberg Polin was buried.
we became absolutely certain that you were coming home to us alive. But it was not to be.
Do you think it's time for Prime Minister Netanyahu to do more on this issue? Do you think he's doing enough?
No.
The grief and pain of a nation captured there, and we understand that there are at least 105 other hostages still being held in Gaza, and the families here who have been protesting are demanding that the rest of the hostages be released through a ceasefire deal. But of course we mustn't forget, of course, the suffering of the Palestinian people over the course of the last 11 months as this war has raged on. Almost 40,000 Palestinians have been killed, 100,000 injured or dead Palestinians in total, and they are the numbers that we are aware of for now. It's hard to know how long this conflict will go on. In about 4 weeks' time, it will mark a year since those hostages were taken and the lives of Palestinians were turned upside down. Thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. For now, good night.